Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do drum replacement or drum layering with different samples in two ways. One, using the stock sounds that are built in with Logic's library, and also I'll show you how to create your own custom replacer kits using the EXS24 sampler. So I've got a mix here I'm working on. Sounds pretty good, but the kick drum and the snare drum are kind of back in the mix, and I could do some more things to them with EQ and compression to bring out the punch a bit more, but I'm just not really happy with the recordings. So let's give this a listen, and then about halfway through, I'll solo out just my drum stack here. So yeah, like I said, the drums don't sound bad or anything. They just the kick drum and the snare drum for like a hard rock tune like this doesn't have enough impact and body for me. Typically what you're doing is you're layering a sample underneath each kick hit or each snare hit or each tom hit, whatever it may be. And you typically will use the close mics. So the kick in is a close mic and the snare top is a close mic. Whereas the snare bottom, it's close to the bottom of the snare drum, but it's not close to the impact point of where you actually hit the snare. The quick way to do this is to use Logic's built-in drum replacement layering doubling function, whatever you want to call it. I'll select the kick in track here and press Control D. This will pull up, well, first it'll analyze the audio and it'll pull up Logic's built-in drum replacement doubling tool. And what you will notice is it'll create a MIDI region and a instrument track just below the track that you selected. So you can choose what instrument this is. This is the kick drum. And then you can choose what mode you're going to use, replacement or doubling. Now, replacement will just mute the original. Doubling will not mute the original. So I'm gonna double this. And you can adjust the threshold here. And what you'll see, there you go, down here is you'll see some of these MIDI notes disappear. Essentially what Logic's drum replacement doubling tool does is it creates a MIDI note for each transient that it senses in the audio recording. So typically you can just go with the threshold setting that it gives you. You can choose a custom trigger note, although if you choose auto and you choose the instrument as a kick drum, it'll default to C1. It'll use the whatever the MIDI drum kit, the general MIDI drum kit assignment for it is. So your kick drum will be C1, your snare drum will be D1. So here is my replacer track. So it's created this instrument track below the audio track. So let's just solo the drums and let's give this a listen. So you can hear that it's playing back an audio sample using the EXS24 sampler. And you can choose your different kick drums just by clicking here, going down to factory, drums and percussion, single drums, kicks. And then here's all of your acoustic kicks. You can do this from the library too. When you first pull this up, you'll see the library will show you a big list, but that same list is mirrored here. So if we try a different kick, it'll load a different sample. Now keep in mind that all of these all these instruments are all velocity layered instruments. So depending on what the velocity of the notes are, you will get a different sound. So one thing I like to do with kick drum is I like to open up this MIDI region. And you'll see that it does vary the velocity based on the transient level up here. With kick drum, I like to make these a little bit more samey. So what I'll often do is just select all of the notes and then hold Option and pull the velocity slider almost all the way up. And what that'll do is it'll make most of them, max volume, yeah. Um, this is okay for kick drum. If you wanna go in and, customize the velocities of some of these, you can. You can click on these individually and pull their velocities up or down, but, what I may do is I'm just gonna pull them all to, like, 115. There we go. So they actually are all the same velocity now, but if you wanted to come back in, you could go in and you could fine tune the velocities for these. Now I won't do the same for the snare drum. I do want the snare drum to have some better dynamics. So let's listen to the drums now that we've layered our kick drum with this sample. Now, if you find that you don't like the sounds that are in the EXS24, you can also try out the drum kit designer, and you can find a kick in here that you like, and you can use that as well. So we're getting a little bit more body, a little bit more of the room in there, not this real dry, stuffy kick like we had before. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to leave it there for now. We will come back and replace this with our own custom sample. But let's do the same thing with our snare top track here. So I'll select that track, hit Control D. This will analyze the audio, pull up the drum replacement doubling tool. I'll choose snare from the instrument here. I'll choose doubling, and there's a couple spots I want to take a look at before I hit OK. There's some spots where I have these like little ghost notes, and I want to make sure that the ghost notes are picked up, because otherwise we're going to have to go back in and manually add those back in. Yeah, it's here in the first bridge. There's some ghost notes in here. I want to make sure it picks up. That part right there is, as you can see down here, it did not pick up those notes. So let me pull the threshold down, which will increase the sensitivity. Yeah, and those notes may just be a little too quiet. Yeah, it's not getting all of them, but it's getting some of them, so that's better than nothing. So I'll leave it that way for now, and we can come back and we can customize those and fine tune those as well. The trigger note, same as before. If I choose auto, it'll make it D1, which is the standard for snare drum. And then what I can do is I can customize my sound for the snare top track as well. Opening the EXS24, going to factory, drums and percussion, single drums, snares. So again, we can come in here and we can customize the velocities. Now, for this, I don't want to make all the velocities the same. I want the snare drum to have some variance in the velocities. So softer hits sound different than louder hits. So what I'm going to do is I am going to pull up the minimum velocity. So what I'll do is I'll select all of these notes, go to Functions, MIDI Transform, and there's one called Velocity Limiter. Let's pull that up. And what this does is it sets a maximum velocity. Well, what I want to do is set a minimum velocity. So I'm going to make my minimum velocity like 50. Then I'll hit Operate Only. And then all these notes that were lower than a velocity of 50 have been pulled up to 50. Because if you have a velocity of like 5 or 10, it's not really going to do much. It's going to be too quiet to even be noticeable in the mix. So let's give all the drums one more listen, and then I'll show you how you can customize your samples using the EXS24. So Logic's built-in drum replacement doubling tool is really cool because this allows you to use any stock plugin in Logic or any third-party drum instrument to trigger drum sounds. So you can really use any MIDI-based instrument, software instrument, as a sound source for your drum replacement. But what if you want to use your own drum samples that maybe you've purchased or you've created yourself? So here I've got a bunch of drum hits. They're just kick and snare drum hits that I've created by blending samples I have in my library with some samples that I've actually created. And you'll see that I've locked the front end of these right on every other downbeat. So I've got four hard kicks. I've got four sort of medium hard kicks. They're only just slightly different than the first four. And then I have four hard snares, four medium snares, and then four soft snares. Now, the reason for me having four of each is because in addition to velocity layering these, we're also going to do something called round robin or alternating samples. Round robin is essentially just a programming term in sample based instruments that means that you don't hear the same sound repetitively. So you can load in four samples that have some variation and it'll cycle through those four samples so you don't get the same sample twice back to back. And it doesn't have to be four. You can do this with almost as many as you want, really. You can do this with 10. You can do it with 12 if you want. I'm just doing it with four because that's how many samples I actually recorded. So each of these samples has some variation in it. They're not just the same sample repeated four times. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create four round robins so that they alternate, and then we'll also create two velocity layers with the kicks and three velocity layers with the snares. So here's how you can edit these up. First, I'm just going to trim up the back end. And what I will do is I will use my scissors tool and I'll use beat snap. And I will cut these at the front end of each transient. Now there's a quick way to do this too. If you use the scissors tool and hold Option, it'll cut all of them for you. Then what I'll do is select all of these, go back to Division, and then just trim the back end up just a little bit. I'm only doing that to make sure that there isn't just a little bit of front end transient left on the back of each one of these samples. And then lastly, I'm just going to select them all again, go over to my region inspector, and I'm going to create a really, really short fade in on all of these, like a 2 millisecond fade in, and then a short fade out. I'll do like a 10 millisecond fade in, or fade out. The 2 millisecond fade in isn't going to affect the transient in any way. It's just there to make sure that the front end of each sample starts on a 0 crossing. Cool, so they sound fine. Now what I can do is export these out. So drag over all of them, right click, go down to export, and then choose export as audio files. So what I'll do is I'll create a new folder for these. I'll call these kick and snare replacer. And then in that folder, I'll just hit export. It'll export each of these individually. So when you export these, it'll just save them sequentially with a number. So I'll just have to remember that the first four are the loud kicks, the second four are the medium kicks, then the loud snares, then the medium snares, then the soft snares. Now you could go through and give each of these a custom name, but I'm not going to do that just because I want to save time. Okay, so I've got my other session back up, and I'm going to use the EXS24 and build my own custom kick and snare replacer instrument. So on the kick drum replacer track, I'm going to load the EXS24 up. And what I'll do is I'll go to the edit window here, and I'll go to instrument, and I'll select new. So now what I can do is I can drag and drop in those samples. So remember the first 8 were our our kick samples. So I'll drag those in. And it's going to ask you, do you want to auto map them, drums without range, root key from audio file, contiguous zones. I'm going to use the drums option, although it's not going to matter. If you use the drums option, it'll just make the instruments, it'll basically put them all in one note, which is nice, and it'll also automatically turn on one shot. So I'm going to pull all of these down to C1. I don't know why it's glitching out like that, but I'm going to pull these all down to C1 because that's the trigger note that we want. And you can also adjust that here by adjusting the key range. You can actually make this take up the entire keyboard if you want. But I'm just going to set the key range from C1 to C1. I'm going to set the root key to C1 as well. This will affect the tuning. However, if you uncheck the pitch option, this won't matter at all. Now, one thing you want to make sure to keep on though is this one shot option. One shot will make sure that the samples play from beginning to end, regardless of how long you hold the key down or how long the MIDI note is. So I'm just clicking on the note and it's playing the entire sample. If one shot is off, it will only play the sample as long as you hold the key down or for as long as the MIDI note is. So you get this sort of cut off sound. So you want to make sure that that is turned on. Now, right now, all 8 of these are playing at the same time. What we need to do is we need to create a round robin set so it loops or it alternates 4 times. And we also need to create a velocity layer set. So let's do the velocity layers first. You can go up to View, Zone Velocity Range, and show this. And what you can do is turn the velocity range on. And then the first 4, 3, 5, 7, and 9, remember those are loud. So I'm going to set a velocity range for 100 to 127 for each of these, just by double clicking and typing in the value. So that means that these top 4 samples are only going to be triggered when the velocity of the note is 100 or higher. Now, likewise, these bottom ones, I want this to be 0 to 99. So this will be the sample. These will be the samples that are triggered when notes are played below 100. Now, all of my notes in my recording are actually 100 or higher, but if I went through and fine-tuned some of the notes and pulled them down to 99 or lower, it would now trigger one of these 4 samples, the medium level samples. So now you can see it's only triggering 4 of them. But now what we need to do is get it to alternate between each set of 4. So this is where things get a little complicated. You have to go to the groups view over here and create 4 groups. So you can go to the group tab here and choose new group, or just press Control G. And notice it labels them starting on 2, not on 1. And the reason for that is because technically the all zones group up here is also a technically group 1. Notice that when you create a group over here in the group view, it shows up over here in zones. And if you select a group, there's no samples in it yet. So what I like to do is I like to name these like RR1, like round robin 1, round robin 2, and so forth and so on. And you don't have to do this with 4. You can do this with pretty much almost as many as you want. You can do it with 10 if you want to. It's just a lot of work. So then what I can do is go back to zone view, go to view, zone group, and show this. And it'll show your group assignment for each of these. So what I can do is the first one, I want it to be in 1, the second one in 2, the third one in 3, the fourth in 4. And then we'll do the same for the medium samples. 1, 2, 3, and 4. That alone doesn't do it. You actually have to do one more thing to get these to alternate. In the Groups tab, you go up to View, Group, Select Group By. Let's pull this over. We got to do a little bit of group triggering programming here. So what we essentially want is we want round robin 2 to be triggered by number 1. So what you do is under this type menu here, you select group for all of these. So this means that each group will be triggered by an instance of another group. So if I want 2 to be triggered by an instance of 1, I choose group 1 as the trigger for number 2. Likewise, I choose group 2 as the trigger for 3, and group 3 the trigger for 4. So, and you don't do anything with number 1, you leave it blank. So now when I press C1, you'll see that it cycles between each of the 4 groups. And then depending on how hard or soft you hit the key or what the velocity is on the note, it'll select a different sample as well. So using round robin and velocity layering is a great way to make your sample-based instruments not sound artificial. So now that we're done with that, I can save the instrument. I'll give it a name. I'll just call it Kick Replacer. All right, so off screen, I did the same thing for the snare, following the same process that I did for the kick drum, except I assigned these to D1 because that's where the trigger note is for snare. And then I created 3 velocity ranges. So 100 to 127 is the loud snares, 70 to 99 is the medium snares, and then 0 to 69 was the softer snares. And then I went and assigned these to the 4 round robin groups. And under the groups tab, I created 4 round robin groups just like I did before, and then did the select group by programming to make sure that the groups trigger each other. And then when I press the key, it alternates between 4 different samples that are velocity sensitive in 3 different layers. And let's see what this sounds like. So typically what I do is I don't just outright replace them, because if I mute the original, it can still sound a bit artificial. And my snare samples aren't like really super punchy either. I'm actually getting a lot of the punch from the snare top track, and the replacer track is more or less just giving it some body. And the same goes for the kick track as well. There's some tone and body that I'm getting from the actual recording. So the best way to do this is to blend the two together, not to simply rely on one. But in some instances, the recording can be so bad that you have to. With my snare, I find that I'm getting the middle volume snare a bit too much. So I'm going to select all of these and pull up by holding Option the velocity a bit more so that I get the louder triggered velocity a bit more often. And there you go. That's how you can build your own custom sample replacers for drum replacement and drum layering. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.